Growing up, my brother Daniel was perfect. At least, that's what my parents believed. In our house, Daniel wasn't just the favorite, he was the center of gravity. Everything revolved around him, his moods, his needs, his dreams. My parents orbited him like loyal satellites, always adjusting their paths to make sure his world stayed comfortable. I noticed it early, even if I couldn't fully understand it at first. When we were little, the differences were subtle enough that people outside our family probably never saw them. But when you live inside something long enough, you start to feel the shape of it. Daniel was 3 years older than me, and according to my parents, that meant he deserved more attention, more patience, more understanding. If Daniel spilled milk at breakfast, my mom would laugh and say, "Boys will be boys." If I spilled milk, she'd sigh and hand me a towel. "You need to be more careful." At family gatherings, Daniel was the star attraction. My parents would proudly announce his accomplishments like they were reading headlines. "Daniel scored 2 goals at his soccer game this week." "Daniel's teacher says he's very creative." "Daniel might be gifted in math." Relatives would smile, clap him on the back, and tell him he was going to be something special one day. Meanwhile, I sat quietly in the corner, eating potato chips and waiting for someone to ask about me. Sometimes they did, and when they did, my mom would give a quick summary. "Oh, she's doing fine." Just fine. That word followed me everywhere. When I brought home my first report card with straight A's in elementary school, I ran into the kitchen, excitement buzzing in my chest. "Mom, look!" She glanced down while stirring a pot on the stove. "That's good, honey," she said. Then she turned toward Daniel, who had wandered in behind me holding his own report card. "Oh, Daniel, how did you do?" He had 2 B's and a C. My mom frowned slightly, then wrapped an arm around his shoulders. "That's okay," she said gently. "School can be hard sometimes." I stood there holding my paper full of A's, suddenly unsure what to do with it. Even then, I could feel something was off. But kids are experts at blaming themselves for things they don't understand. So I decided the problem must be me. Maybe my achievements weren't impressive enough. Maybe I needed to try harder. Maybe if I was perfect, they'd notice. I spent years chasing that idea. In middle school, I joined the debate team, the science club, and the student council. I stayed up late studying, triple-checking homework assignments, and practicing presentations in front of my bedroom mirror. Daniel, meanwhile, coasted through life. He forgot homework, he skipped chores, he argued with teachers, and somehow none of it stuck to him. Whenever there was a problem, my parents found a way to soften it. When Daniel got detention for talking back to a teacher, my dad shrugged. Teachers these days are too sensitive. When Daniel failed a math test, my mom blamed the school system. They don't know how to teach boys properly. When I once got a B+ on a science quiz, my dad raised an eyebrow. "You usually do better than that." It wasn't cruelty exactly. It was something quieter, more constant, a slow drip of expectations and comparisons that soaked into everything. By the time we were teenagers, the difference between us had become impossible to ignore. Daniel had freedom. I had responsibility. He could stay out late with friends. I had to text my parents every hour when I went to a friend's house. If Daniel forgot to clean his room, my mom would eventually do it herself. If my room wasn't spotless, I'd hear about it for days. "Why can't you be more organized?" she'd say. The irony was almost funny. I was the organized one. But facts didn't matter when a family had already decided what role you played. Daniel was the golden child, and I was the dependable one, the helper, the backup. When Daniel got his driver's license at 16, my parents threw a small party. They bought balloons, ordered pizza, and invited a few relatives over to celebrate. "Freedom," my dad announced, raising a soda can like it was champagne. A month later, they bought Daniel a car. It wasn't brand new, but it might as well have been in our neighborhood. A sleek, used Mustang that gleamed under the sun. I remember the day it arrived. The car pulled into the driveway while Daniel stood outside grinning like he'd just won the lottery. My mom clapped her hands in excitement. "Isn't it beautiful?" My dad tossed Daniel the keys. "Take care of her." Daniel jumped into the driver's seat, revved the engine loudly, and sped down the street while my parents watched proudly. I stood on the porch next to them. "Wow," I said quietly. My mom smiled. "Your brother deserves it." When I turned 16, I got a different gift, a reminder about responsibility. "You'll have to wait for a car," my dad explained. "Money's tight." Instead, they handed me a schedule for the city bus. "Plenty of kids use public transportation," my mom said. I nodded. What else was I supposed to do? But that wasn't the moment that hurt the most. That moment came 2 years later, when I turned 18. Daniel's Mustang still sat proudly in the driveway, even though he barely took care of it. I woke up on my birthday, hoping, just a little, that maybe things would be different for me. Not a car, not anything big, just something that showed they saw me too. At breakfast, my mom handed me a small envelope. Inside was a plastic bus pass. "College is expensive, honey," she said kindly. "We can't afford everything." I forced a smile. "Thanks." Outside, Daniel started his car. The engine roared like always. He leaned out the window. "Hey, want a ride to school?" For a second, I considered saying yes, but something inside me felt strange, like a quiet realization was forming. I looked down at the bus pass in my hand, then at the shiny Mustang, then back at my brother who had never once questioned why everything came easier for him. I shook my head. "I'm good," I said. He shrugged and drove off. I walked to the bus stop alone. Standing there with strangers in the morning cold, I finally admitted something to myself. My parents weren't going to change, Daniel wasn't going to notice, and if I wanted a life where I mattered, I was going to have to build it myself. By the time Daniel graduated high school, my parents were already talking about his future like it was something guaranteed to be extraordinary. Not hoped for, not planned for, guaranteed. At dinner every night, the conversation revolved around universities, careers, and opportunities waiting for him out in the world. My dad would sit at the table with brochures spread out like treasure maps. "Look at this campus," he'd say, pointing at glossy photos of ivy-covered buildings and smiling students lounging on green lawns. "This place has one of the best business programs in the country." Daniel barely looked up from his phone. "Yeah, looks cool," he muttered. My mom leaned forward, excited. "You'd love it there. Think about the connections you'd make." I sat across from them quietly, eating my dinner while they discussed tuition costs that made my stomach twist. 30,000 a year. 40,000 a year. Sometimes even more. Every number felt like it belonged to a different universe. One night, my dad cleared his throat. "We've been thinking," he said, glancing between Daniel and my mom. "If Daniel gets accepted into one of these schools, we're going to make it work." My mom nodded immediately. "We want him to have every opportunity." I waited for them to mention me. They didn't. Not once. A few months later, Daniel got accepted into a private university 2 states away. When the letter arrived, my parents reacted like someone had just announced a royal engagement. My mom screamed. My dad hugged Daniel so hard they nearly knocked over a chair. "This is huge," my mom kept repeating. They ordered takeout from Daniel's favorite restaurant that night and called half the extended family to share the news. "He's going to do amazing things," my dad told everyone proudly. I congratulated Daniel, of course. I even meant it. But somewhere deep inside, I also knew something else was happening. Something that would shape the rest of our lives. Because once Daniel committed to that school, my parents committed to something even bigger. Paying for it. All of it. Tuition, housing, food, books, transportation. They took out loans, dipped into their savings, and even pulled money from their retirement fund. When I overheard my mom mention that part on the phone one afternoon, I felt a knot form in my chest. Retirement? I asked later that evening. My dad waved his hand dismissively. It's an investment. In Daniel, my mom added with a warm smile. Then she said something that stuck with me for years. He just has so much potential. I wondered quietly what that meant for me. Not long after Daniel left for college, I started applying to schools too. But my situation looked very different. One night, I sat down with my parents at the kitchen table. College acceptance letters were scattered in front of me. 2 state universities had accepted me. One even offered a small academic scholarship. I felt proud, hopeful. Those are good schools, my dad said. My mom nodded politely, but their excitement was muted, practical. So, my mom said carefully, have you thought about how you're going to pay for it? I blinked. I thought we'd figure it out together. They exchanged a quick glance. My dad leaned back in his chair. Well, things are a little tight right now. Of course they were. Daniel's tuition had started. Student housing deposits had been paid. A brand new laptop had been purchased. Every spare dollar seemed to be flowing in one direction, toward him. We'll support you emotionally, my mom added quickly, like that fixed everything. I stared at the acceptance letters in front of me, then at them. So, I'm on my own? My dad didn't say yes, but he didn't say no either. Instead, he said the sentence that would echo in my mind for years. You're strong. You'll figure it out. That was how my college journey began. Not with celebration, not with family planning, with a quiet understanding that I was responsible for myself. I enrolled in the state university that offered the scholarship. It didn't cover everything, not even close, but it was something. To make the rest work, I got a job. Actually, 2 jobs. During the day, I attended classes and studied in crowded campus libraries. In the evenings, I worked at a small coffee shop near campus. On weekends, I stocked shelves at a grocery store. My life became a constant cycle of alarms, schedules, and exhaustion. Wake up at 6, class at 8, work until midnight, repeat. Some nights I fell asleep fully dressed on top of my blankets because I was too tired to move. Meanwhile, Daniel's social media told a very different story. Pictures of football games, dorm parties, road trips with friends, captions about living the college dream. My parents shared those photos proudly. Look how happy he is, my mom would say whenever we talked on the phone. They never asked how tired I was, or how much I was working, or whether I was okay. They assumed I was, because I was the strong one. During my second year, things got especially hard. One of my classes required a specialized textbook that cost almost $200. 200 might not sound like much to some people, but to me, it was the difference between paying rent or not. I stared at the bookstore price tag for a long time before leaving empty-handed. That night, I called my mom. Not because I wanted to, but because I was out of options. Hey, honey, she answered cheerfully. I hesitated before speaking. Mom, I need a little help. The silence on the other end felt heavier than expected. With what? A textbook, I said quietly. It's required for my class. How much? About 200. Another pause. Then she sighed. You know we're helping Daniel with a lot right now. I swallowed. I know. I just thought maybe... Honey, she interrupted gently. We already spent so much helping Daniel. You're stronger. You'll figure it out. The words weren't cruel, they were calm, reasonable. That somehow made them hurt more. I forced myself to say, okay. Then I hung up. For a long time, I just sat on the floor of my tiny apartment staring at my phone. Not crying yet, just thinking. It wasn't really about the textbook, it was about what the moment meant. Daniel received investment. I received expectation. He was supported. I was tested. Eventually, I bought the textbook anyway. I picked up extra shifts, skipped groceries for a week, and made it work. Because that was the thing about being the strong one. No one ever checks if you're drowning. They just assume you'll keep swimming. And somehow, I did. Years passed in a blur of effort, exhaustion, and quiet determination. While Daniel's life seemed to drift from one phase to another, mine slowly began to take shape. By the time I graduated from college, I had become someone I barely recognized from the girl standing at that cold bus stop years ago. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was capable, independent, and stronger than I had ever imagined. Graduation day should have been one of the happiest days of my life. I walked across the stage with honors, my heart pounding as the audience applauded. My hands trembled slightly as I accepted my diploma. All those sleepless nights, all those shifts at the coffee shop, all those sacrifices. This was the proof that it had been worth it. For a moment, I looked into the crowd. Rows of families were cheering, holding flowers, waving signs, snapping photos. My eyes searched instinctively for two familiar faces, but the seats where my parents had promised they would sit were empty. Later, my mom called to explain. Daniel needed help moving apartments, she said casually, as if that answered everything. You understand, right? I stared at my diploma sitting on the table in front of me. Yeah, I said quietly. I understand. And the truth was, I did. Because by then, the pattern had become so normal it almost didn't surprise me anymore. After graduation, I moved to a new city for a job opportunity. It wasn't glamorous, but it was stable, and it paid well enough for me to finally breathe. For the first time in my life, I didn't have to juggle two jobs just to stay afloat. I rented a small apartment with clean white walls and large windows that let in sunlight every morning. I bought furniture piece by piece, nothing fancy, but every item was mine. Every paycheck felt like a quiet victory. Every step forward reminded me that I had built this life on my own. Meanwhile, Daniel's story unfolded very differently. At first, things seemed fine. He posted pictures from campus parties, football games, and late-night adventures with friends. My parents proudly shared those photos like proof that their sacrifices had been worth it. But by the middle of his second year, the tone began to change. The posts slowed down. The calls from my mom became more frequent. One evening, she mentioned it casually while we were talking. Daniel's classes have been a little difficult, she said. Difficult how? I asked. Oh, just stress. College pressure. I didn't push. A few months later, the truth came out. Daniel had dropped several classes, then he dropped an entire semester. Eventually, he dropped out completely. When my mom told me, her voice sounded tired. He just needs time to figure things out. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. Okay, I said carefully. He's moving back home for a while, she added. A while. That while turned into years. Daniel bounced between part-time jobs and vague plans about what he might want to do next. At first, it was a retail job, then a delivery job, then something related to sales that lasted 3 months before he quit. Every time something didn't work out, my parents had a reason, ready. The manager was unfair. The company didn't appreciate him. He just hasn't found the right path yet. Meanwhile, I kept moving forward. I got promoted at work, then promoted again. I started building savings for the first time in my life. But despite everything I had accomplished, every visit home still felt strangely familiar. Daniel still lived in his old bedroom. My mom still cooked his favorite meals. My dad still talked about Daniel's potential. And somehow, no matter how much time passed, Daniel was still treated like the center of everything. Then one evening, about 5 years after I graduated, my phone rang. It was my mom. Her voice sounded different. Tense. "Honey, are you busy?" "A little," I said. "What's going on?" "We need to talk about something important." That sentence alone made my stomach tighten. "Okay. Could you come by this weekend?" The request felt serious enough that I agreed without asking too many questions. When I arrived at my parents' house that Saturday evening, the atmosphere felt heavy. The living room lights were dim. My dad sat in his usual chair, rubbing his forehead like he had a headache. Daniel wasn't there. At least, not yet. "Sit down," my mom said softly. I sat across from them, suddenly aware of how quiet the house felt. "What's going on?" My parents exchanged a glance. Finally, my dad spoke. "Daniel's been having some financial trouble." That didn't surprise me, but the way they said it made my chest tighten. "What kind of trouble?" My mom clasped her hands together nervously. "He has some debt." "How much?" They hesitated. That hesitation told me everything before they even answered. "About 40,000, my dad said quietly. For a moment, the number just hung in the air. 40,000. I blinked. How does someone even rack up that much? Credit cards? Personal loans? Unpaid bills? A car loan he had stopped paying months ago. Every explanation made the situation sound worse. "And you've been helping him with this?" I asked slowly. My mom nodded. "We've done what we can." I already knew what that meant. Their savings were gone. Again. Then my dad looked directly at me. "You're doing well these days," he said carefully. There it was, the real reason I had been called. "We were hoping you might be able to help." The room felt suddenly smaller. "How much help?" I asked. My mom's voice was almost apologetic. "Maybe most of it." I stared at them. $40,000. $40,000 for the same brother who had received everything growing up. The same brother whose education had been fully funded. The same brother who had been protected from every consequence. My chest felt tight. For the first time in years, the memories came rushing back. The bus pass, the empty graduation seats, the textbook I couldn't afford. The words my mom had said so casually. "You're stronger. You'll figure it out." I took a slow breath. Then I asked the question that had been buried deep inside me for most of my life. "What about helping me?" The silence that followed felt deafening. My parents looked genuinely confused, as if the question itself didn't make sense. Finally, my mom spoke. "Well, Daniel needs it more." And just like that, something inside me finally broke. That night, I drove home in complete silence. The road stretched endlessly in front of me, illuminated only by the soft glow of streetlights and the occasional headlights of passing cars. Normally, driving helped me clear my head, but this time my mind felt strangely still. Not angry, not devastated, just clear. For years, I had carried a quiet hope inside me that one day things would balance out, that eventually my parents would see the effort I had put into my life, that they would recognize the sacrifices I made and the strength it took to stand on my own. But sitting in that living room earlier had stripped away that illusion. $40,000. That was what my parents believed I should give my brother. Not because of an emergency, not because of something beyond his control, but because he had once again made choices without thinking about the consequences, and they expected me to fix it. The most painful part wasn't even the request. It was the way they asked. So casually, so confidently, as if it was obvious that I would say yes. as if my life, my savings, and my hard work naturally existed to support Daniel. When I finally pulled in to my apartment parking lot, I turned off the engine but stayed in the car for several minutes. My phone sat on the passenger seat. No messages, no apologies, no second thoughts from my parents. They had simply assumed I would take responsibility. I leaned my head back against the seat and closed my eyes. Memories started surfacing one by one. Standing at the bus stop at 18, working late shifts at the coffee shop while studying for exams, calling my mom for help with that textbook. "You're stronger. You'll figure it out." Back then, those words had hurt. But now I realized something strange. She'd been right. I had figured it out. Without them. The next morning, I woke up with the same sense of calm. Usually, when I faced conflict with my family, anxiety would settle into my chest like a heavy weight. I would rehearse conversations in my head, worry about disappointing them, and eventually find a way to compromise. But this time felt different. The decision had already been made somewhere deep inside me. I picked up my phone and called my mom. She answered almost immediately. "Honey, I was just thinking about you." Her voice sounded hopeful, like she already believed everything was settled. "I thought about what you said last night," I told her. There was a small pause. "And? I'm not paying Daniel's debt." The silence that followed stretched long enough for me to hear the faint ticking of a clock somewhere in her house. Finally, she spoke. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I'm not giving him $40,000. Her tone shifted immediately. "But he's your brother." "I know," I said calmly. "And family helps family," she insisted. I took a slow breath. "And you're his parents." Another pause. This one heavier. "We've already done everything we can," she said. "And I've done everything I can for my own life," I replied. Her voice sharpened slightly. "You're doing well now. It wouldn't hurt you to help." That sentence made something inside me tighten, not because of the request, but because of what it implied. All those years of working, struggling, and building a stable life had somehow turned into an obligation in their eyes. My success wasn't mine. It was a resource for Daniel. "I worked for that money," I said quietly. "So did we," my mom shot back. "And we used it to support your brother." The words hung in the air between us. Exactly. They had used everything they had for him, and now they were looking at me like the next supply. "You're abandoning your family," my mom said suddenly. The accusation didn't hit me the way it used to. "You're being selfish." For years, that word would have shattered me. Selfish. It was the worst thing you could be in our family. But now it just sounded empty. "You've changed," she added, her voice filled with disappointment. Maybe I had. Because instead of apologizing like I normally would, I did something my family had never expected from me. I set a boundary. "I'm not your emergency fund," I said. My voice stayed calm, even though my heart was beating faster now. "I'm not responsible for Daniel's choices." My mom exhaled sharply. "You're going to regret this." Maybe. But deep down, I didn't think so. "I hope he figures things out," I said. Then I ended the call. My hands trembled slightly as I placed the phone on the table. Not from guilt, from adrenaline. Standing up for myself felt unfamiliar, like using a muscle that had been ignored for years. Over the next few days, the messages started coming. First, from my mom, then my dad, then even Daniel. My mom's texts were filled with disappointment. "I can't believe you would do this to your brother. We raised you better than this. You're tearing the family apart." My dad's messages were quieter, but heavier. "Think about what you're doing. Family should stick together. Your brother needs help." Daniel's message came last. Short, blunt. "So you're really not going to help me?" I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I set the phone down without answering. Because the truth was simple. For most of my life, I had been the one bending, the one adjusting, the one sacrificing. Every time there was conflict, I was expected to give more. Be more understanding. Be more patient. Be more forgiving. But now something had shifted. For the first time, I realized something important. Love shouldn't require you to disappear. And family shouldn't require you to destroy your own life to protect someone else's mistakes. The guilt kept coming, the pressure, the disappointment. But I didn't break. Instead, I did something no one in my family expected. I stopped answering. I stopped responding to the messages. I stopped taking the calls. Days passed, then weeks, then months. At first, the silence felt strange, almost unnatural, like a constant noise in my life had suddenly disappeared. But slowly, that quiet turned into something peaceful. Without the constant comparisons and guilt, I had space to breathe, space to think, space to realize something I had never fully allowed myself to believe before. I wasn't responsible for fixing my family, and walking away from something that hurts you isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the strongest decision you can make. The silence that followed my decision stretched longer than I expected. At first, I kept waiting for the next wave of guilt to crash over me. For years, that had been the pattern. Whenever I stood up for myself, even in small ways, it was only a matter of time before doubt crept in. I would replay conversations in my head, wondering if I had been too harsh, too stubborn, too selfish. But this time something was different. Days turned into weeks, and instead of feeling worse, I felt lighter. Without the constant pressure from my family, my mind finally had room to breathe. It was strange how much energy I had spent anticipating their reactions, preparing myself for disappointment, or trying to prove I was worthy of their approval. Once that noise disappeared, life felt quieter, simpler. And in that quiet, I started paying attention to my own life again. Work became more than just a responsibility. I started taking risks at the office, volunteering for projects I used to avoid because I was too tired or overwhelmed. My manager noticed, and within a few months I was leading a small team. The promotion came shortly after. It wasn't just the raise that made me proud. It was the realization that every step forward had come from my own effort. No safety net, no financial help, no special treatment. Just persistence. Outside of work, my life began to expand in ways it never had before. For years, I had lived in survival mode, working, studying, paying bills, repeating the same exhausting routine. Now I had time. Real time. I joined a small hiking group one weekend after seeing a flyer at a coffee shop. The first hike was awkward and a little uncomfortable, but by the third one, I was laughing with people who felt strangely easy to be around. No comparisons, no expectations, just conversations and shared experiences. I traveled for the first time too. Nothing extravagant, just a short trip to a coastal town a few hours away. But standing on the beach, feeling the wind coming off the ocean and listening to the waves crash against the shore, I realized something important. For the first time in my life, I was living for myself. Not trying to prove anything, not trying to earn approval, just living. Slowly, something else began to grow inside me. Confidence. The kind that doesn't come from compliments or validation, but from knowing exactly what you've survived and what you're capable of. The girl who once stood silently in the corner while everyone praised Daniel felt like a distant memory. That version of me had spent years believing she needed permission to exist. But the woman standing on that beach understood something very different. My worth had never depended on anyone else's recognition. I had simply been too busy chasing it to see that. Almost a year passed without any real contact from my family. Occasionally, my mom would send a short message, something neutral like a holiday greeting or a quick, "Hope you're doing well." I responded politely, but briefly. The distance remained, and strangely, it felt healthy. Then one evening, just as I was finishing dinner, my phone buzzed with a notification. A message from Daniel. I stared at his name on the screen longer than I expected. It had been almost a year since we last spoke. Part of me wondered if this was the moment everything might change. Maybe he wanted to talk. Maybe time had given him perspective. Maybe, just maybe, he was reaching out to repair the relationship we never really had. I opened the message. It was only one sentence. "Hey, can you help me out with some money?" I read it twice, then a third time. No greeting, no apology, no acknowledgement of the past year, just a request. Again. For a moment, I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so predictable. All those years of protection from my parents had taught Daniel something dangerous, that someone else would always clean up the mess. First, it had been them. Now, he expected it to be me. I leaned back in my chair and looked around my apartment. The furniture I had saved for, the framed photos from trips I had taken, the quiet sense of stability that had taken years to build. Everything around me existed because I had fought for it, because I had worked when I was tired, studied when I was overwhelmed, and kept going when no one was there to help. Daniel had never seen that part of my life. He had only seen the result. For the first time, I didn't feel angry about it. I felt detached, like I was looking at an old story that no longer belonged to me. I picked up my phone and typed a response. Just one sentence. Figure it out. I did. I stared at the message for a second before pressing send. Then I blocked his number. The finality of it should have felt heavy. Instead, it felt peaceful, like closing a door that had been left open for far too long. Later that night, I sat on my balcony watching the city lights flicker in the distance. The air was cool, and the faint sounds of traffic drifted through the streets below. I thought about my parents, about Daniel, about the years I had spent trying to earn something that was never freely given. For a long time, I believed walking away meant losing family, losing connection, losing the place I had grown up in. But sitting there in the quiet, I finally understood the truth. Walking away from people who treat you like you're less isn't weakness. It's freedom. My parents had given everything they had to their golden child. Every dollar, every ounce of attention, every opportunity. And in doing so, they accidentally gave me something far more valuable: independence, strength, and the realization that my life didn't have to revolve around their expectations. Because once you understand your worth, something incredible happens. You stop begging for a seat at someone else's table. You stop shrinking yourself to fit into roles that were never fair to begin with. You start building something new, something better, your own table, your own life. And the girl who once stood quietly in the background becomes someone unstoppable, not because she was given everything, but because she learned how to build everything herself.